Welcome to Books in Five, where we interview the authors of recently published books on relevant topics. We'll be asking the author 5 questions, and they will have 5 minutes to answer each one. I'm very excited about my guest today, as he has written an excellent new book about pop culture and the entertainment industry. Walt, thank you so much for being our guest on Books in Five. Please tell us your full name, the title of your book, and where you are joining us from today.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. My name is Walt Hickey. I am a data journalist. I wrote a book called You Are What You Watch, which is all about how pop culture affects everything. I am joining you from New York City, right around 14th Street. I am the executive editor of a site called Sherwood News, but I also read a newsletter called Numlock. I've been doing that for about 8 years at this point, and it's all about fascinating numbers buried in the news. So a lot of what I'm really interested in is data journalism and the intersection with pop culture, which ended up producing this book that we're going to chat about.
Amazing, Walt. Let's begin with our first question. You've written an ambitious book about the impact of television and movies on our lives. What motivated you to explore this topic at such a detailed level?
Yeah, so the book, lots of people want to write books because they're interested in a topic. I ended up writing this book just because it was at a certain level unavoidable. I had been covering basically data journalism and pop culture for a few years at a site called FiveThirtyEight, and I was always kind of struck by the fact that whenever I would even talk to a source or kind of do some research or talk to people who were interested in the space, or even just describe what I do to a new acquaintance at a bar, right? I would always get something back that just kind of blew me away, which was like, oh yeah, I'm a doctor because I watched Grey's Anatomy when I was growing up, or I got into the sciences because I was just so inspired by movies like Jurassic Park and things like that. And people would just drop this very much offhand. Oftentimes, if you talk to people about what they do and kind of why they do it, they'll sometimes kind of circle back and basically just be like, yeah, I saw Top Gun and I really wanted to be in the Navy and all that kind of stuff. And so I just kept on encountering this, and I kept on encountering ways that pop culture had ramifications across the world, right? We would see, I was writing around at the time as well. We were really interested in, inclusion in cinema, right? There's this fascinating research group out in California that counts every single speaking character in every movie. And they had been pounding the drum for years that, listen, only 1 out of every 3 speaking characters is a woman. What does that change about the way that we view our society? And so I had always been kind of fascinated by, not just movies, not just books, not just stories, but how these things kind of affect us. Because, if I thought about my own life, a reason that I was, encouraged to pursue mathematics was I had a knack for it when I was a kid, and I saw, Jurassic Park, and there's this fascinating mathematician in that movie who's right about everything and saves the day and is cool as heck. And yeah, I was in no small part because of that inclined to potentially pursue that as my studies. And so, long and short, it just kept on coming up, and I kind of just was like, okay, just for my own sake, maybe I'll read an article or something about it. I want to see what the data says, what the science says, what the existing literature says about how movies and television affect the world. And gosh, it was just such a deep, deep reservoir. I found studies across all sorts of different topics. There wasn't one science that kind of studies this. It just kept on coming up in everything, right? I ran into studies about how pop culture affects people's cardiovascular health and kind of how people, when they watch a horror movie, their heart gets pumping and things like that. I found all sorts of sociological studies about, how people perceive crime based on the movies that they watch, and how people perceive other countries based on the movies that they watch. People relationship with government institutions, whether it's NASA, whether it's the military, is more often than not mediated not by what these bureaucracies accomplish and what they do, but how we perceive them in films. And so I just really had a big download, and I was like, geez, this could be a real book. And so the book was my attempt to kind of make sense of what I thought was a rather undercovered element of movies and TV, which is just how these things have massive ramifications across our society, across who we, see in ourselves, our ambitions, our careers, who we love, where we travel, what we name our kids, and what dogs we adopt, and just kind of all these different ways that people allow themselves, whether they do it intentionally or not, to really be changed by the things in the movies that we watch. And kind of a big crux of the book comes down to the idea is that, like, this is not time wasted. This is not time just kind of spent idly. This is not time like that we just kind of we while away the hours watching television and watching movies. It's like this is ultimately an extremely important thing for how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the world around us. And so the book really dives deep into the data behind all that. And, I interviewed dozens of scientists, researchers, incorporated the results of all sorts of scientific studies, did a few of my own, with some eye tracking goggles and some galvanic skin response techniques, and did really just kind of pulled in a ton of really fascinating data that I worked with this incredible data visualization artist, Heather Jones, to put into almost 100, if I recall correctly, charts, graphs, and just kind of very cool immersive things. So yeah, that is where the book kind of came from, and just kind of what got me really going on it.
Let's move on to our second question. And you've already brought it up, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into it, because our physical bodies react to what we are consuming as entertainment. Walk us through the scientific research of our eyes, our brains, and the rest of our anatomy as we watch something.
Yeah, so I was really excited to come across some of this research because it wasn't being done intentionally as media research. As in, it wasn't a person who studies the effect of media looking for these biomedical markers. A lot of the times, it was actually people who were looking into the biophysicality of different things and then using movies as a prompt. And I'll give you an example or two. So one of them was there was this really interesting group of researchers out of the European Union who they had their annual summit, and the European Union speaks a lot of languages. And this laboratory, they had folks from all sorts of different countries, whether it was German speaking, English speaking, so on and so forth. And they realized that all of their countries had a word for blood curdling. And that's a very strange idea that every single nation and language that among their crew had a word for, like, oh, your blood thickens when you feel scared. And so they ran this study just because they wanted to figure out what actually happens when you get scared, and they used films as prompts. And so they were able to find out that, like, when you watch a horror movie, when you watch a scary movie, your body actually takes steps to prepare for injury. It releases coagulation factors so that your body's more likely to survive a wound, right? Because even if you don't take the movie particularly seriously, your brain does. And that's a really interesting idea, and we see it extend across all sorts of different topics. If we look at what we exhale, which is one way of kind of gauging the chemistry that goes on in our body, we can find out that, for instance, in movies at very tense moments, everybody is doing the same thing. They're all flinching and clenching because we know that we can measure the isoprene that's released through their breath, and we can determine that that is the result of a muscular reaction, right? So you'll see in the same movie screening on different days, similar spikes in the air chemistry when you kind of follow different people's reactions in different cinemas. So we can see these kind of chemical signatures that replicate themselves time and time again, which to me says something really powerful, which is that movies are not just light and sound. They are a biophysical reaction that is consistent. You can track the nervous system's level of intensity and engagement, the thing called arousal, through these devices known as galvanic skin response devices. And if you show people the same movie, they have very similar charts of engagement. They all get very, very interested at the same moments in the film. They all get very, very emotionally aroused at the same moments in the film. And so, film isn't just a visual thing that we see or an audio thing that we see. It is a full body immersive reaction because your body is taking the things that you see very, very seriously. And I think that that's just ultimately very powerful because it leads us to kind of think about, well, of course it makes sense that movies can affect our society, it can affect our behaviors, it can affect our ambitions, it can affect our careers, because it's already messing with some really crucial matter, right? It's really, we are engaging on these on a level that is not simply intellectual. We are engaging at a level that is biophysical, and that is through the parasympathetic nervous system, not just simply our cognitive reaction to this stuff. And it makes some sense because, again, like, our sight is kind of designed, design's the wrong word obviously, but like as omnivorous mammals, we evolved a couple different ways of seeing, right? There's we have our kind of general scanning kind of vision, which is, if you imagine back in the day, we would look at a savanna and scan for threats or scan for food, and then we have our locked in pursuit, so our eyes can lock in on, oh, there's a thing I want to catch, there's a thing I want to run from. And as a result, movies are really kind of playing with this same technology. There's a lot of really exciting stuff that's been done with eye tracking technology, and in particular, what makes good direction tends to be distinctly correlated to movies that are very effective at consistently hurting people's eyeballs around the screen at the same time. And essentially, if you were to contrast a Steven Spielberg movie, with excellently directed film, with security camera footage, right? It's undirected footage, right? When I show you the security camera footage, your eye doesn't know what's important. It's going to look all over the place. If you've got a room full of 100 people, they're going to be looking in 100 different places because the security camera footage isn't leading them to look in the same place. Whereas an outstanding director, all those people are going to be locked in on the same face. They're going to be following the same movement. They're going to be following the same car, the same individual, the same shot. And that's what makes for masterful direction. And so we are actually seeing movies as technology that is directly applying the lessons of how our brains and our eyes follow important information, and packaging it in such a way that it just becomes a manner of entertainment. And so I don't know, I think that the main upshot of all of this is that I consistently came away from that phase of the book reporting shocked at just how powerful the leads and how powerful the connections that we're playing with are. Like your brain takes horror movies very seriously, and it will change the way that your body is producing chemicals to respond, right? Your eyes are essentially being hijacked by directors in order to kind of get the most powerful and resonant and consistent emotional response. And so that's a really fun part of a lot of the early part of this book.
Let's move on to our third question. The most interesting chapter to me was the one where you describe how pop culture acts as a mirror of our society. Can you explain for us some of what you learned about how our stories highlight our fears and our desires?
Yeah, no, this was really fun. It was a chance to kind of it's the middle step between how do movies affect us physiologically and psychologically, and how do they affect our society as a whole, is a lot of this kind of identity-driven stuff. And a lot of these a lot of it kind of comes down to how heroes and villains are portrayed on screen. That's just a very good starting point. You tend to kind of see villains and people who act as antagonists be a little bit more eye-catching and a little bit more interesting. And one reason for that is that in general, people pay attention to things that are more likely to hurt them rather than things that are more likely to help them. There have been a number of studies done on this fact where, if you show somebody a video of somebody being helpful and an ally, and in the same video show a threat, people's eyes tend to focus more on the threat because the threat is, by definition, the more interesting thing, right? And so, a lot of this means that the way that we talk about villainy is very much helps to define what the heroes are actually fighting for. You have this concept of Superman, and that's a lot of values that are important and things like that. But you can also, through the villains, get a better understanding of what actually this individual stands for, right? Whether it's when he fights General Zod, right, who's a person from the same background as he is, but who's comes to this planet with the effort to destroy it. You see that, okay, well, Superman is a paragon of diversity, and he wants to fight for his newfound home, and does not have the Kryptonian supremacist views that other people might have, which is obviously it characterizes who he is as an individual. You can see the same thing with Lex Luthor, where he is good because it's just the right thing to do versus wants to gain power and that kind of stuff. And so you can see lots of villains define themselves, or heroes define themselves in terms of villains, and villains kind of stand for a point of view that is being rejected. What's interesting on that front is you can also kind of see how monster movies can reflect a lot of social anxieties. Zombie movies in general can kind of be about social anxiety and the anxiety of being around other people and how other people can behave and be threats to you, right? Werewolf movies have historically been about the beast within all humans and the relationship that we have to being animalistic in nature. I write a lot actually about vampires, which I find absolutely fascinating because vampires are this very consistent and very durable legend that since kind of emerging from folklore in the Balkans and kind of spreading throughout Central Europe and then the worldwide have become just very much a potent metaphor for whatever the society is afraid of at the time. And that can be, early on, it can be foreigners and kind of anxiety around the effect that they might have on us. Later on, they might be the wealthy or the ruling class or the aristocracy, which is sucking the blood out of the workers. Later on, it can even be sexuality, right? Like again, in the early 20th century, you see a lot of the films. That's when Dracula gets rebranded as a sexual being and a predator in many ways, right? And then, obviously you can see different evolutions of that through even more contemporary cinema, like you have in the 80s, things like The Lost Boys, which is more about adolescence and kind of, this vampiric consumerist kind of class. And you can see eventually even kind of coming back around with things like Twilight to being more about, anxieties about teen sexuality and all that kind of thing. And then obviously you come to the sensations like Sinners, which came out after the book was out, but could not have more fun with this particular narrative because in that situation it's about vampires as a form of cultural and industrial appropriation of kind of taking organic creativity and then sucking it up into an exploitative kind of structure. So I don't know. I think that you can kind of learn a lot about a society based on who you follow as a hero and the values that person has, but also who the heroes that they have fight and the monsters that they essentially attempt to repel.
Let's move on to our fourth question. I want to dive deeper into the commercial nature of our entertainment sources that are described in the book. What are the major features of the modern era of pop culture that you want us to know about?
Yeah, I mean, the commercial element was a very big chapter that I worked on, and I think that so much of it was just, it's like economics can be, I'm not super interested in the rat race between how much a given movie is going to make in a given weekend, but I think that money is a way of keeping the score and kind of articulating trends and using economics to kind of understand human instinct is really interesting. I think that like one thing that I've been super surprised by lately and really think is a trend that is kind of worth following is nostalgia and kind of a lot of these nostalgia-driven reboots and nostalgia-driven content, whether that's Harry Potter stuff for the millennials or whether that's even just like some of the comic book movie stuff. We've been in kind of a retro-futuristic era. If you look at the summer with the new Superman and the new Fantastic Four, inherently kind of nostalgia positioned. Nostalgia as an instinct comes from loneliness more often than not. Loneliness tends to be very strongly correlated with the desire to pursue nostalgic feelings. And you can argue as our society has potentially become more mediated by digital and social media, it's been a little bit harder to get that kind of direct human connection that can kind of serve as a little bit of an insulation against nostalgia. And so I've been very interested in kind of the exploitation of that. I think one thing, there's this very fun section in the book that I go into about one of the most interesting companies that has ever existed in the social media space, which is the Warner Brothers Studio Store, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers in the 90s. They were kind of a startup operation. Disney had stores long before that, but what Warner Brother actually did that has now become just kind of the oxygen that we're all breathing is that Warner Brothers was the first folks to realize that you could sell adults branded cartoons and branded superhero content, right? Like the Batman in 1989 really unlocked the door of like, there's, we should be making Batman shirts in adult sizes and not just for children, which had historically been the norm up through, well through the 80s. And I think that if you look at nerd culture now, if you look at convention culture now, if you look at where all the money is in pop culture, you are trying to get adults to spend money on it. And if you look at in the book, I dive into kind of the Oppenheimer in the desert moment for this merchandising, which was the Warner Brothers Studio Store, which figured out you could sell Looney Tunes materials to baby boomers as long as the material was high quality and more importantly, as long as they had an identity stake in it. Nobody wore a Looney Tunes shirt, but they wore a Foghorn Leghorn shirt if they were that kind of guy. If you were a little bit more rambunctious, you had a Taz mug. You didn't have any other mugs. There were Tweety people, there were Sylvester people. Every IT department had their share of Marvin the Martian guys, and they realized that by turning this pop cultural and nostalgia relationship that you have with this media property, and connecting it to people's self-perception, you can sell them a lot of stuff. And if you look at the current state of media, that's really huge, right? Like, I mean, man, it goes beyond Team Edward and Team Jacob. But if you think about like Harry Potter houses, right? It's not just people don't play with Harry Potter action figures. They buy the house clothing so that because they're such a Gryffindor or they're such a Ravenclaw. You can see this with, Team Cap and Team Iron Man, and like nobody has just an Avengers shirt, but they have their Black Widow shirt, or I have a Hawkeye shirt, and like it's really trying to play into how you perceive yourself within the value system of these pop cultural entities. That it's not nobody has a shirt with all the Pokemon on it. You either have like, I have a Snorlax shirt because that's not my kind of guy, or I have a Pikachu shirt. And so a lot of this recently that is super interesting to me is that like and this is a very novel thing, is that people's identities are tied up with this, with what has historically just been, again, stories for children, and people are using this as a way to kind of define themselves in the world as a whole. And I think that trend is interesting. Good, bad, that's not really what I'm here to weigh in on, but I think it's interesting.
Let's conclude with our final question. Soft power is increasingly important in our world of geopolitical tension. Does pop culture play a role in improving the stature and influence that a nation has?
Oh, to a huge extent. It is soft power is this kind of conceit of like, listen, like hard power is if I want a country to do what I would prefer them to do, I can roll a battleship into the bay, and then all of a sudden people are we're all working together at that point. Soft power is this different idea, which is like, instead of doing that, why not just have cultural exports, and so that they can do the things that you want them to do because they share enough shared cultural identity with you and understand your mutual values that you can essentially just be on the same team. Britain in the post-war, in post-World War II, was in really just like a straightforward, like hard power decline. Like it went from being the British Empire and having an enormous military resources to, not being really an empire anymore. Instead, the way that they maintained cultural relevance and cultural hegemony was through culture, right? There's a reason that Queen Elizabeth started knighting actors and musicians, right? Because people have an affinity for the United Kingdom, not because of how many ships they have, but because they liked Monty Python when they were growing up, or they liked the Beatles a lot. And it doesn't just end with, that's a very sincere example, but like Japan really ran this playbook very, very hard in the 90s and 2000s. Japan had, post-war had not had the highest esteem among its neighbors, owing in no small part to its actions during the war. But anime just got really, really damn popular, and unavoidably so. I think that if you were to go into the deepest rainforest and showed a kid a picture of Goku, they probably know who it is. Like, at the end of the day, you saw this kind of cultural export really, and particularly with Pokemon, kind of accelerate significantly. And now anime is one of the most popular forms of entertainment in the world. Their neighbors in South Korea saw this and actually have kind of enacted a state-sponsored policy to expand this too. There's a reason that you're seeing so much K-pop. There's a reason that you're seeing webtoons become a dominant way of cultural distribution. There's a reason that Squid Game is doing so well, that Parasite's doing so well, that you have so much more exposure to it. Like right now, the top movie in America is the K-pop Demon Hunters, which is a film about Korean pop culture produced by a Japanese company that is having a sensational run in America. Like 3 of the top 10 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 chart right now are from that film. And so at the end of the day, I think that you can kind of see cultures rise in esteem and in values, and just kind of have broader connections, in no small part because of their pop culture. South Korea did not have to build a battleship to make America fascinated by what it puts out and have a stronger level of affection. They had to produce BTS. And so I think that what you kind of see time and again is that this takes place on a lot of different levels. People's perceptions of other countries are strongly shaped by film. People do a lot of tourism because of what they see on film. It takes place in Middle Earth, but it was shot in New Zealand, and so Lord of the Rings prompted a huge amount of travel from the Northern Hemisphere to New Zealand. And you saw a similar effect back in the 90s with Australia and the Crocodile Dundee thing. Like, we kind of find that like people are willing to travel long distances and see things that they have only seen in movies before, in no small part because pop culture really is a way of mediating a lot of the differences that we have with one another, and kind of making us understand one another in a more intricate capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just about the economics, the influence matters as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, like Britain's perception after the war when it comes to their espionage. Again, like the MI6 had a lot of problems. If you read the news in the 50s and 60s, the things that you would read is like, oh, the Soviets have infiltrated MI6, and if you were reading the papers, that's your perception that you would have of British intelligence. But thanks to James Bond, nobody thinks that. They think that the British are amazing spies and are single-handedly holding the world together, one agent at a time, which is probably bullshit. I don't know. I'm not in the intelligence services. I couldn't tell you whether that's right or wrong. But at the end of the day, that is the perception. And perception really is meaningful on this front.
Walt, that has been our 5 questions. You've answered them in 5 minutes. Let's move on to our bonus questions. Walt, tell us a little bit more about your journey to becoming a data journalist. I know you brought it up a little bit earlier, but tell us more about your career.
Yeah, I was a mathematics major in college, focusing on probability and statistics, and I wrote for the student newspaper on the side, mostly just out of sanity. Like, you have to have a hobby that counterbalances the thing that you're studying. And it was a really exciting time to be a journalist at that point. Digital media was really on a roll. And more importantly, it was a really great moment to be, a little bit good at math. At the time, folks like Nate Silver were just getting prominence at places like the Times. And so I ended up going into journalism just because I thought it'd be fun and interesting. And I've just kind of been playing that hand since. I was at 538 for about 5 years. I was then at Business Insider for 5 years doing a lot of their election coverage and kind of their real-time results coverage as well, and doing some very fun stuff with comics that I'm super proud of. And then working on Numlock, which is obviously a very numbers-driven thing. And now I'm running a news site at Sherwood News, which kind of covers business and the intersection of data. And so I don't know, I've just been having a really good time trying to see what we can kind of bring to the equation, and just kind of how we can help readers understand the world better through hard information.
Obviously, the book is a major achievement, but let us know about another accomplishment that you're proud of, because it says on the book that you're the winner of a Pulitzer.
Yeah, no, I won a Pulitzer. That was the comic stuff that I was talking about. When I was at BI, we were interested in kind of how we can tell news stories and reported feature stories using the emerging media of comics. Comics have often in the past been used to talk about viewpoints and talk about true historical facts. And I think that what we were trying to do is, how do we use some of the newer versions of comics that, like, the scrolling kind of webtoon style comics, to adapt news stories that were just hard to do in text. The story that we ended up winning for was a woman who escaped from a Uyghur internment camp in Western China, where she suffered serious abuse at the hands of the authorities and managed to escape to Pakistan and then to the United States. But the thing about, internment camps in the Xinjiang region of China is that they don't let photographers in, right? And so we had read her story before. She was very open about her story, but it was just very hard for, visually driven readers to kind of make heads or tails of it. Like, it was kind of an abstraction. It was, a lot of times people just don't bond as succinctly with written words as they do with visuals. And so a lot of the work that we were doing on that project, whether it was that story or it was a story that we did about refugees who escaped by boat from Libya to Greece and then suffered a shipwreck in between, whether it was about folks who went to Qatar on the idea that they would play soccer but instead were given construction jobs building the World Cup. These are stories that can really only be and can best be told using the visual medium of comics, and that was some of what I was working on at BI, and obviously incredibly proud of the prize, incredibly proud of the work that we did there. And I am just, as a reader of comics, very, very thrilled that we managed to kind of advance the field a bit on that front. So yeah.
Walt, what are you working on next? Any other book project in the future?
Yeah, maybe. So a lot of my focus right now is on Sherwood. We are a year old at this point. We cover financial news and markets, and we're trying to do a really interesting way of covering just the news that we think that hasn't necessarily been as effectively covered by a lot of the incumbents as possible. So if you are interested in markets news, finance, crypto, any of that kind of stuff, do check out Sherwood. I might or might not be working on a book. You never want to talk about your intentions until the ink is dry. But yeah, I mean, I think that I really, really, really loved working on this book, the one that You Are What You Watch, and I want to do it again. And I think that a lot of it just kind of comes down to making sure that you find the topic that just is like with You Are What You Watch. I had so much to cover. Like there was just so deep that you can go, and a lot of the challenge of it was just kind of figuring out where to draw the line, right? Like I don't cover video games in this book. Not because I don't think that they're stories, but because I think that, to cover video games would require just it would have to be twice as long. There's just so much to cover there when it comes to the more immersive elements of kind of consuming stories and the more kind of self-directed element of it, that like if you want to find a topic that you just can't stop talking about, and with You Are What You Watch, I got extremely lucky in finding that. And so I think working on the next stages of a potential future book, you really just want to write about something that you can't stop thinking about,
Again, the title of the book is You Are What You Watch. I'm going to put a link to the book in the show notes. You should definitely check it out. If you're not able to buy it, read it from your local library, because it really tells us about pop culture, about entertainment, and the graphics are amazing. Walt, where can people find you? You're active on social media, right?
Yeah. I would say the most consistent place to find me is at Numlock. Just go to numlock.com, like the key on the keyboard. That's my newsletter. If folks dig the book, if folks dig any of the places that I've worked in the past, they'll dig Numlock. Beyond that, I'm on Blue Sky. I am on Twitter, or X, whatever the devil we're calling it now. I don't know. I'm a pretty easy guy to get a hold of. If folks enjoy the book and want to reach out or have questions or anything like that, or want access to the data sets or anything, like just hit me up. I'm kind of an easy guy to get a hold of. But yeah, I am Walt Hickey on pretty much every platform that counts. And yeah.
Walt, thank you so much for joining us on Books in 5.
Thank you for having me. This is so fun.
The host of Books in 5 is Bhavan Sudan. Books in 5 is produced in collaboration with Podfather Creative in Vancouver, Canada.